Hi, I'm Luke Lango, and this is Investor Place Quick Picks, where we communicate to you some of the market's best investment ideas in just 10 minutes.
America's leading innovation investor, Luke Lango's Investor Place Quick Picks.
Today, we're going to talk about a psychedelic stock that is on the cutting edge of the shroom boom, and which has enormous long-term upside potential. The name, Compass Pathways, ticker CMPS. So, remember when marijuana used to be taboo? Yeah, back in 1970, Richard Nixon passed the Controlled Substances Act as a part of his war on drugs. In that act, marijuana was labeled a Schedule I drug, meaning it was listed next to cocaine and heroin as an extremely dangerous, extremely illegal substance with no accepted medical use. Yeah, so much for that. Today, the global legal marijuana market measures $17 billion and is growing at a 40% per year pace. What happened? Emerging science changed public perception, which paved the path for legalization and a marijuana boom. Early pot stock investors are sitting on huge returns today. Now, the same thing is about to happen with another Schedule I drug, psychedelics. Yes, those psychedelics, magic mushrooms, LSD, MDMA, DMT. For years and years, society has frowned upon psychedelics as hard drugs to be avoided, but new science is showing that they actually have robust therapeutic potential. The company on the cutting edge of this research, the company pioneering a new class of psychedelic-inspired drugs, you guessed it, Compass Pathways. And that's why this stock is such a great long-term buy. Here's a deeper look. So let's talk about how the pot boom started. An abundance of academic research came out in the early 2000s, which illustrated the medical benefits of marijuana, going against what had been decades of formal folks saying that weed is bad for you. At the same time, Hollywood began to portray weed as being a friendly, fun drug in movies like Harold and Kumar and Step Brothers. Marijuana gradually became destigmatized. Consumer attitudes shifted. Changing public perception turned into growing public demand for legalization. And a few protests and bills later, marijuana wasn't just legalized, it turned into one of the hottest consumer markets in the world. Now, it's time for psychedelics to follow the same playbook. As I stated earlier, for decades, society has frowned upon psychedelics as hard drugs to be avoided. But things weren't always like that. Let's rewind 70 years. Back in the 1950s, a group of pioneering psychiatrists in California, led by Humphrey Osmond, were actively experimenting with psychedelics. They found that hallucinogenic drugs had immense therapeutic potential. But socio-political backlash against hippie culture in the 1960s halted their research, and in 1970, psychedelics landed on Nixon's Schedule I drug list. The book was closed on psychedelic research until the 2010s, when academia reopened that book and discovered a world of opportunity and untapped potential. A pair of recent Johns Hopkins studies have found that the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, something called psilocybin, can significantly help with smoking cessation and reducing alcohol dependence. An even more recent Johns Hopkins study published in 2020 found that psilocybin can relieve anxiety and depression levels in people with life-threatening cancer diagnoses 4 times better than traditional antidepressants on the market. That finding corroborates a previous NYU study, which found that psilocybin causes a, quote, rapid and sustained reduction in anxiety and depression levels in cancer patients. Meanwhile, a recent UC Davis study found that psychedelic microdosing can produce beneficial behavioral effects in patients with mental health disorders. And most recently, an Imperial College London study published in just 2 weeks ago found that psilocybin is better and faster at treating depression than Lexapro, a leading antidepressant treatment today. The list of academic studies goes on and on. And they all are coming to the same conclusion. Psychedelic-inspired medicines have robust therapeutic potential. The science is changing. And this emerging science is shifting public perception too. In 2020, a flurry of movies and TV shows like Gwyneth Paltrow's The Goop Lab, the Netflix documentary Have a Good Trip, Adventures in Psychedelics, and the docuseries The Business of Drugs has collectively shown a favorable light on the benefits of psychedelics and helped to destigmatize these drugs in mainstream media. Major podcasts like Freakonomics and Joe Rogan have talked about psychedelic-inspired medicines and their therapeutic potential. Also, major news companies like NPR, NBC News, and the New York Times are covering the emerging psychedelic industry in a positive light. So, public perception is shifting. And now, even laws are changing. On Election Day 2020, Washington, D.C. and Oregon both passed measures to legalize psilocybin, marking the first legal domino to fall for the psychedelics megatrend. In other words, psychedelics are following in the footsteps of marijuana from taboo to mainstream. So, what comes next? The shroom boom. An era wherein psychedelic-inspired medicines become globally ubiquitous and redefine how we treat mental health disorders. This shroom boom starts now. One of my favorite shroom stocks has long been MindMed. I first recommended MindMed stock when it was trading for 30 cents back in mid-2020. Now it's a near $5 stock. And guess what just happened to MindMed? It uplisted to the NASDAQ, which is a huge deal since it will increase investor awareness of and exposure to this industry. At the same time, Atai Life Sciences, another psychedelics company that is backed by billionaire VC investor Peter Thiel, who is famously known as Facebook's first investor, just filed for a $100 million IPO. And over this past weekend, the New York Times ran a long piece on the psychedelics industry. Folks, the psychedelic space is heating up. The time to invest is now. If you want to get in on the ground floor of what may be the biggest biotech and pharmaceutical breakthrough of the century. But alas, here's the million-dollar question. What is the best psychedelic stock to buy today? The answer is simple. Compass Pathways. For a few reasons, Compass Pathways is the unrivaled leader in psychedelic-inspired medicine commercialization, and by extension, the best bet on the shroom boom. First, the company has a leading proprietary psychedelic treatment that is already going through clinical trials. It is basically considered the #1 drug candidate in this entire space. For context, Compass is hyper-focused on using psilocybin to treat treatment-resistant depression, or TRD. The company has created a proprietary psilocybin formulation dubbed COMP360, which completed phase 1 trials in 2019 in which the treatment was shown to be well tolerated. Phase 2 trials have commenced in 2020. Results are expected in late 2021. Importantly, this timeline puts Compass miles ahead of everyone else in the space. Most of Compass's peers are still in the experimentation phase and trying to come up with their own proprietary psychedelic-inspired medicines. But Compass is already in the midst of clinical trials, with big results due soon. Second, Compass's board includes some of the pharma industry's brightest stars. And its early backers include some of the world's most well-respected VCs. The former chairman of Johnson & Johnson sits on Compass's board. So does the former director of the U.S. National Institute of Mental Health. And the former executive director of the EMA. The board also counts leading psychiatry professors from Stanford, Harvard, and Imperial College London as members. As if that roster weren't enough, the aforementioned legendary VC investor Peter Thiel also owns a 7.5% stake in Compass. So, if anyone is going to crack the code of making a best-in-market psilocybin treatment for depression, it's going to be these guys. Third, the company has a clear pathway to being first to market. And first mover's advantage matters in the shroom boom, because COMP360 is already in phase 2 trials. And because the team here knows a thing or two about commercializing therapeutics, Compass has a clear pathway to being first to market with a FDA-approved psychedelics-inspired treatment. That's a big deal, because FDA approval takes a long time, meaning that Compass will likely have a 2 to 3 year window in the 2020s in which COMP360 will be the only psych treatment out there. A period long enough for Compass to establish and sustain market dominance. Long term, we love Compass Pathways. I mean, the shroom boom is the next big investment megatrend in the healthcare biotech sector. Compass Pathways is the leading company in this explosive megatrend. If COMP360 pans out, and it should, given studies from NYU, Johns Hopkins, and others that show the robust benefits of psilocybin, then Compass Pathways has a huge commercial runway ahead of it. Within the next few years, Compass stock could easily soar above $100. Well, that's all we have for this edition of Investor Place Quick Picks. I hope you like what you saw. If you did, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, smash the like button. Well, cheers. Until next time, happy investing to all.